Hi everyone! Today we are going to be learning about how to divide whole numbers by fractions using models. So the first thing I want to look at is just a review of division. One way that we can look at division is this number, 10, as the total number of objects, and the number 2, the number we're dividing by, as the number of objects in each group. Then our answer is going to mean how many groups of 2 fit into 10. So I would solve this problem by circling groups of 2 and then counting how many groups I have. So clearly I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups. So the answer to this problem is 5. So again, this number 2 means how many are in each group, and this number 5 represents how many groups there are. Okay, this is not the only way to look at division. Sometimes we can say if this is the number of groups, the answer tells us how many are in each group. It works both ways. But I want us to think about this as the number in each group and the answer as the number of groups. Okay? Alright, so now we are going to look at a problem where we are dividing a whole number by a fraction. So the division sentence I have is 1 divided by 1/2. So using what we just talked about, remember that the 1 represents our total, or what we are starting with, and the 1/2 is going to represent the number in each group. Okay, so the answer to this problem is going to mean how many 1/2 are in 1. So to solve this problem using a model, I'm going to start by drawing out my total. Just like before, I started with 10 because that's the number I was starting with or dividing. Here I'm going to start with one whole. So I drew one rectangle. Now it says that I'm counting how many 1/2 are inside this 1. So what I'm going to do now is separate this 1 into half. Each of these represents 1/2. So now I'm going to count how many groups there are. So I'm going to circle, this is one group, and this is two groups. So my answer is 2. So 1 divided by 1/2 is 2, meaning there are 2 groups of 1/2 inside 1. Okay, so now using what we just found out, 1 divided by 1/2 equals 2, I'm going to now solve the problem 2 divided by 1/2. So again, this is asking us how many 1/2 are in 2. How many groups of 1/2 are in 2? Remember, this is the size of my group, this is my total, and my answer is going to be how many groups. Okay, so right now I have 1 and it's split up into halves, but now my total changed to 2. So what I'm going to do now is draw another whole. Okay, so this was my first one. Now I'm drawing 2 wholes, that's my total. And again, you see I split it up into halves because I'm looking to see how many halves fit into 2. So before I had 2 halves fit into 1, but now I'm adding 2 more. So the question is how many halves fit into 2, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So the answer is 4. There are 4 groups of 1/2 in 2 wholes. So now what you might want to start to notice is if I change this division sentence now to 3 divided by 1/2, we can start to follow a pattern. So I'm going to draw another whole and again cut it into halves and then count how many groups of 1/2 are in that. Again, I added 2 more halves, so now the answer is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 groups of 1/2 in 3. As you can see, my answer is going up by 2 every time I add another whole. That's because there are 2 1/2 in one whole. So you might notice that all we have to do if we want to figure out for example, 4 divided by 1/2 is we can multiply the whole number 4 by the denominator 2. Again, the reason that we can do this is because there are 2 halves in each whole. So if I have 2 halves and there are 4 wholes, that means there are going to be a total of 8 halves in my 4 wholes. And again, I could just draw another whole and split it into halves and count them up. Okay, so what I would like you to do right now is try this problem on your own. 3 divided by 1/6. Pause the video and then come back and I'll walk through the steps of how to solve this problem. Okay, so hopefully you were able to solve this problem. I'm going to walk through it. So the first thing I'm looking at is this number 3. If this is the number that's being divided, or my dividend, that means that that's my total. So I'm going to draw a total of 3 boxes. 1, 2, and 3. My divisor is 1/6. That means that I'm asking myself how many 1/6 or how many groups of 1/6 are there in my 3 wholes. So now what I have to do is split each of these wholes up into 6 equal parts. Okay, best way to do it, split it in half first, then split each half into thirds. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so just going to fill in, I'm not going to fill in all of them, but each of these represents 1/6 because my whole is split up into 6 equal parts. So looking at this first whole right here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 1/6 in my first whole. Well, that's going to be the same for each of them. I know that because 1/6 means it's cut up into 6 equal parts. So in my second whole, I know I also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now in my 2 wholes, that would be 6 plus 6, that's 12. And then again, another 6 in my third whole. And so that would be 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is a total of 18 groups of 1/6. Again, you're going to see this pattern. 3 divided by 1/6 is actually the same thing as multiplying your whole number 3 times the denominator 6, which is 18. So I could say, I'll write this down here, 3 divided by 1/6 is actually the same as 3 times 6. These two statements are equivalent. They will give me the same answer. So it's kind of strange, it's a little bit different. Dividing by a fraction is actually the same thing as multiplying by a whole number. So it's a little different than the normal division that we've seen. Okay, so we've been focused on dividing a whole number by unit fractions, meaning that the numerator is a 1. But now, as you can see, my problem is dividing my whole number by just any fraction. So my numerator is not 1 anymore. My numerator is actually 2. So, just to point out, if I had 4 divided by 1/3, I know that that would equal 12. We talked about this as the same as 4 times 3 equals 12. If I had 4 wholes, I split each of them into groups of 1/3, I would have 12 groups. Okay, but now I want to see how many 2/3 fit into 4. Very similar question, it's just now my groups are getting bigger. Okay, 2/3 is greater than 1/3, so the size of my groups are increasing. As I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, well, if the size of the groups are increasing, that means that my answer should actually be decreasing. Okay, and we're going to show that using a model. So I'm going to draw 4 wholes again. Okay, and this represents my dividend, the number right here. This is how many I start with. Okay, now I'm going to split them into thirds. Okay, so each one of these represents 1/3, and as I go through this, I notice obviously there are 3/3 in each whole, because 3/3 equals 1 whole. And if I count all of these, I'm going to get 12, which is what we just spoke about. There are 12 1/3 in 4. Okay, so now I have split it up into 2/3. Now what I'm going to do is group them into groups of 2/3. So if this is 1/3 and this is 1/3, together this makes 2/3. So I'm going to circle this, and that's 2/3. I'm going to try and do it in a different color. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to keep doing that. So that's one group of 2/3. Here's another group of 2/3. Here's another group of 2/3. And here's another group of 2/3. That's 4. But I'm not done. There are still pieces left over, so I'm going to see if I can group them into more groups of 2/3, which I can. Here I have 1/3 and 1/3, so that makes 2/3. And here I have 1/3 and 1/3. That again makes 2/3. Now let's count how many groups I have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my answer is 6. Now notice, my quotient, my answer, did go down. There are 12 1/3 in 4, but as I made the groups bigger, this right here, there are 2/3 in each group, the number of groups decreased, and it actually decreased by exactly half. When I multiplied this divisor by 2, it got 2 times bigger. My answer became half of the original. That's really important to notice. We're going to talk about it more next week. Okay, so now I want you to try this problem, 3 divided by 3/4 on your own. So pause the video, give it a shot, and then come back and I'll walk you through the steps. Okay, so I hope you were able to solve this problem on your own. If not, that's okay, I'll walk you through it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is look at my dividend, which here is 3. So that means that I'm going to draw 3 whole boxes. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so that represents what I start with. And now the question is, how many 3/4 are there in this 3? Well, first, let's figure out how many fourths there are. So I'm going to cut this into each whole into fourths. Okay, so each one of these represents 1/4. And as you can see, there are 4/4 in each whole. So that means that in one whole there's 4, in 2 there's 8, and in 3 there is 12. So this is the same thing as saying 3 divided by 1/4 equals 12. And remember, 3 divided by 1/4 is the same as 3 times 4. Okay, remember we can multiply the whole number times the denominator. Alright, so now the question though this time is how many 3/4 are there? So I'm going to be splitting this into groups of 3/4. Remember, this is the size of my group. So here I have 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. Together, those 3 make 3/4. So I'm going to group them together. Let's make a circle. So it's one group of 3/4. I'm actually going to combine bars. So this one is 1, 2, 3. That's 3/4. Okay. This one's 3/4. And then this is 3/4. So it doesn't exactly matter how you group them together. You're going to get the same answer. There are 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are 4 groups of 3/4 inside 3. Okay? And now again, let's notice this. I originally started, there are 12 1/4 in 3. As I increase the size of my groups, so now I'm not counting groups of 1/4, I'm counting groups of 3/4. The groups get bigger. What happens to the number of groups? There are going to be less of them. Originally there were 12, now there are 4. And actually you'll notice that as we times 1/4 times 3, to get 3/4, we triple the size of the groups. The number of groups actually becomes 1/3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Okay, so now we're going to continue working with dividing whole numbers by fractions, but this time we're going to see what happens when we have a remainder. So again, I want to go back to regular whole number division to compare what we would do when we have a remainder. So in this example that I'm giving you, we have 10 divided by 3. So again, we start with 10, so I drew out 10 boxes to represent our total. And this 3, we're going to say represents the number in each group, or the size of each group. So I'm going to split this up into groups of 3. And as you can see, I have 3 groups. So my answer would be 3, but that's not exactly true, because if I did 3 times 3, I would get 9, not 10. So my answer is not 3. I have to write this remainder. So as you know, I could write remainder 1, but instead I'm going to write this as a fraction. So to write this as a fraction, what you would think about is, well, if I had, I'm going to draw in 2 invisible boxes. If I had 2 more, didn't come out so good, but if I had 2 more boxes, that would make up one whole group. So I can think of this one remainder, this one that's left over, as 1 out of 3 to make one whole group. So I would write my remainder as 1/3. Because again, this here represents the number of groups. Well, there are 3 whole groups, and then there is 1/3 of a group. 1 out of 3 to make a whole group. Okay? So now let's apply this to dividing by fractions. Okay, so the problem that we're going to try to show how to write our answer as a remainder is 4 divided by 3/4. So I already drew out 4 wholes, and I split them into groups of 1/4. And as you can see, there are 16 1/4 in 4. So 4 divided by 1/4 would be 16. Okay, but now I'm going to be splitting them into groups of 3/4. So we've done this already. This would be 3/4. So let's make our circles. Show our groups. That's 1. This is 2. This is 3. This is 4. And then here I have 3/4. Okay, kind of a strange looking group, but we did it. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 whole groups. So that's part of my answer. There are 5 groups of 3/4, but there is 1 that's left over. So we have to write this as a fraction. Now, a common mistake is to say that there is 5 1/4 left. And that's our answer. But 1/4 is not the size of the group. 1/4 is the size of the piece that's left. But remember, we're making groups of 3. So let's do the same thing that we did in the original problem that we showed remainders. And let's make 2 more pieces, imaginary pieces with dotted lines. Okay, and these would represent the rest of the pieces necessary to make one whole group. So again, we have 1 piece out of 3 to make one whole group. So our remainder we would actually write as 1/3. Again, this 5 represents the total number of groups that we have. This 1/3 represents the fact that we have 1 out of 3 to make a whole group. Okay, again, I would like you to try this problem on your own, 3 divided by 2/5, and then come back to check your answer. Okay, so as you can see, I drew out 3 holes, and I split them into fifths. Okay, and then now I'm going to circle groups of 2/5. So here's 2/5, 2/5, 2/5, 2/5, 2/5, 2/5, and then I have a couple more right here. That's 2/5. Okay, so in total, I created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 groups of 2/5. So I'm going to write that as my answer, 7. However, I have this one piece left over. Now, again, a very common mistake would be to say that the answer is 7 1/5. Okay, I'm going to cross this out, put a big cross through it. 7 1/5 is not correct. The size of the piece is 1/5. However, that is not the size of the group. The groups are made up of 2 pieces of 1/5. So let's draw in our imaginary piece right here. 2/5 would make one group. So again, we are saying that we have one piece out of 2 to make a group. So the answer is actually 7 1/2. Okay, and just to make this very clear, the numerator is always the number of leftover pieces. So leftover, here we had one piece that was left over, we couldn't make a group. And then the denominator, which in this case is 2, is the size of the groups. In this case, there are 2 pieces in each group, so we would say the size of the groups is 2. Okay, so we get 7 1/2, and that is the number of groups of 2/5 that are in 3. I hope this video helped, and thanks for watching. Bye.